You're prepared, you're ready to roll.
This is Mira Yordanova. I'm interviewing Mr. George Heidekat. Today is Wednesday, March 26th, 2025. This is our first interview for the Duquesne Duke Centennial Oral History Project. The interview is taking place at the Media Studio at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Could you please say and spell your name for the record, please?
Certainly. My name is George Heidekat. The last name is spelled Heidekat.
Thank you. So why don't we start with what was your favorite part of being editor-in-chief?
Well, that covers a lot of ground. Favorite part. I would say sort of, well, the Duke to me was the Duke office to me was a clubhouse. I started out in the journalism department. I was aware of the Duke. I popped in. I would do some writing assignments here and there. And through that, I met a really close bunch of folks that I became friends with and stayed in touch with for decades. So part of it was reinforcement and socialization for a kid who would have otherwise been kind of lost, young guy from the suburbs, not sure what he was up to, but started the journalism department for maybe not the strongest reasons, but I found a community. Maybe that's a way to phrase it. I found a community there. And the ability to have a place to go and people who were accepting and who gave me encouragement and whom I could encourage in turn was a valuable experience. There were practical skills that I picked up on the Duke that were much more vivid than the classroom stuff in the journalism department. How to edit a story tightly, how to write a story, how to deal with an interview or to cover an event, how to ask questions, how to plan ahead, how to hit a deadline. Deadlines always were looming. So it was a combination of social reinforcement, a question of feeling more integrated into the campus community, learning some real life skills that I used for the rest of my life, and being in touch with campus events as well, just being where stories would come in. People could walk in off the street, off the academic walk with an idea for a story or a complaint or perhaps an announcement of an event. And through that, you were sort of wired into the grapevine of the campus. And it was also a place where I could connect up with other groups, other activities. There was a photo club. There may still be a photo club here. But the photography club, there was a natural connection with the Duke because the guys in the photo club would shoot the photography that went into the paper. And when some of my fellow reporters had film to process, back in the day of film, we could walk across the hall and process our film and print our photos and bring them back to the office and pick up some useful skills in photography. The magazine office, which I guess you still have a magazine, and the yearbook office were on either side of the Duke office. So there was a little community there of people who at least cared about words and communication and so on. So there was an extended community. And it was in what I considered a very comfortable environment. The student union was brand new in those days. You could still smell the wet concrete. And I loved it. It was cool. It was streamlined. It was a good environment for me. I enjoyed hanging out there.
Thank you. You mentioned you find the community here. What do you mean by that? How was your life before that? Do you have a community back then?
Well, I had
or-
high school friends, of course. Now, I was coming from high school in the South Hills. I was leaving essentially my friends behind, although I wasn't changing towns, but this is where I was all day. And yeah, I met I met kids in class, or having coffee at the Ratskeller or in the student union. But this sort of sped up accelerated the process of making friends. You had a legitimate reason for being in the same room with somebody and perhaps sharing a shared project. It was a shared project overall. And that brought me closer to a group of people that were all interested in the same kinds of things.
Thank you. Which story, event, or experience defined your time as editor-in-chief back then?
What story defined our time? 1968 was a pretty uproarious time in history. Martin Luther King was assassinated in the spring. Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, was assassinated that spring. Vietnam War was becoming a major issue. So there was tension, there was excitement, and a certain, not quite the polarization we see today by any means, but there was a definite vibe of this is right, this is wrong. Go back to King's assassination. Following that, there was, 6 weeks of rioting across the United States, including the Hill District, which was essentially across the street. So we were pretty intensely aware of what was going on, and we had our student reporters and our photographers going out to cover what was happening essentially in our backyard. So it wasn't just somewhere out there's civil unrest and protests going on. It was right here. So that was vivid, I would say. That would be one of the key events during my tenure.
You mentioned that about the riots, and we know that 1968 was extremely difficult year for the United States. But
Yeah.
what were some challenging editorial decisions that you had to make during that period of time?
That's an excellent question. And of course, memory fades. But in retrospect, it seems to me that there were so many smart people working on the Duke at that time that my job was very easy. Things got done. So it wasn't a question of digging things up and pushing people to get things done. It was an intelligent group, very much united behind at least the idea of getting a paper out. And it wasn't as if there was a big pushback from any place that I had to overcome. So ask that question again, if you don't mind.
One more time.
Sure.
What were some challenging editorial decisions that you had to make?
Okay. I honestly don't remember a challenging decision I had to make.
Okay.
As I said, it seemed obvious at the time what had to be done. The sports section, for instance, which was really, and probably still is, one of the major chunks, it just got done. The sports guys knew what they were doing, boom, 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 that would get done. The editorial, at the end of the week, right up against the deadline, I would bash out an editorial about the issue that seemed to be prominent right at the moment, but I don't remember anyone pushing back as far as the administration or the journalism department at that time. It seems to me now, at least, that it was fairly streamlined and low pressure. As far as a challenge I can recall, well, Duquesne was very conservative in those days. may well still be. I don't know, but it was funny. What became an issue, for instance, was an advertisement for a feminine hygiene product that was placed. You know, it was a paying ad. It was for tampons, as it turns out, and that seems relatively non-controversial. But I remember a guy coming in and saying, "I don't want my girlfriend to see this kind of thing in the campus paper." That was an issue. He was outraged that there was something intimate that was being aired in the paper, and there was, okay, it's all right, we'll kind of, it'll be okay, but keep in perspective, blah blah blah. So you might view that as a challenge in a strangely Duquesne kind of a way, but there were no challenges that I recall as far as, well, can we print this story, or will one of our journalists be disciplined? In my memory, it wasn't that challenging a time. It was a challenging time for the world. But for the Duke, very smart people got things done. Decisions appeared to have been valid, and there wasn't a lot of pushback from the administration or the J Department or most of the student body. People were happy to see the basketball news, and the the military ball was announced, and there was, the schedule was maintained, and the important things to people, news from the Greeks, news from the the campus ministry community, it got in there. People were happy, as I recall.
You mentioned a couple of times very smart people work here. Does that mean the collaboration was a big part of working at Duquesne Duke?
Ask me that again. I'm sorry, I missed the front part.
So you mentioned that in Duquesne Duke work very smart people.
Yeah.
Is that mean that you collaborated all the time with other people?
Oh, well,
or
no,
it's
not
more
necessarily.
individualistic?
No, we weren't just we weren't just echoing what we thought the other guy thought. There was intelligent people, each having their own solution to a problem, if there was a problem, or a question of emphasizing something, or whether this picture or that picture should go in. It was collegial. People were willing to listen to each other. There wasn't a lot of ill feeling. I think one of the good things about that group in that time was that they respected each other. They were willing to discuss and come to a realization, and sometimes the decision was just made by the deadline. We're done. We can't rewrite this again. We're done. In terms of conflict, I can go off into a side trip and say this. I told you, I think when we first talked, that I met my wife on staff at the Duke.
Actually, you didn't mention that.
I didn't mention that.
But now, as you said it, tell me about that.
Well,
Tell me
this
about
was
that story.
okay. So I began. I guess the editing thing. My editorship took off in September '68, and Lorraine, my wife, transferred in that semester. She had gone to a school back east. And she was smart. She had run she's still smart, but she was the editor of her campus newspaper at Immaculata School for Girls out near Philadelphia. So she came in and she had ideas about journalism, and she was pretty serious. And we used to fight. It was like in the movies. These two characters, well, wait a minute, that's wrong. Oh, wait a minute. No, I don't understand why you're saying that. So there was that level of, no, I'm going to go out and cover this story. But Lorraine, you can't. But nature took its course, and we wound up a couple of years later getting married. We were married in the chapel by the university chaplain. But that was where I sort of remember conflict. It was like, well, you don't respect me. Oh, yes, I do. Well, you don't think I can write this story. I know you can write this story, but I already gave it to somebody else. So it was like in the movies. But it was never a deep ideological dispute that I can remember.
That was very interesting. You mentioned your wife, Lorraine. Does this mean that she has a big contribution to being editor-in-chief Is that inspire you in a way? Your wife?
That's a good question. There were, in the beginning, she was one of, a dozen people on the staff. So she was part of she contributed to the atmosphere that then formed what was going forward, and I guess what I was doing and how I was feeling. But initially, she wasn't, she again fit in with the group very quickly. So it wasn't like she was an agitator or a misfit. She smoothly worked, stepped in, sharing the same values, understanding how to spell things or how to ask somebody how to spell something if you weren't sure.
Next question. Following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as you mentioned, Pittsburgh experienced significant unrest.
Yes.
Including riots in the Hill District.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Well,
what can you remember?
What I can remember, of course, blends seamlessly into all the national news footage and coverage and journalism that was happening at the time. But the Hill District was, as I recall, classically the black neighborhood of Pittsburgh, the Harlem of Pittsburgh. And the community was already unhappy because a thing called urban renewal was going on in those days. A big chunk of the Hill District with old businesses and venues and people's homes was bulldozed to build the Civic Arena. The Civic Arena, which you can look up, was a large sports arena that has since been torn down. It was over just past where the hockey arena is now. But it was a major civic achievement, and Pittsburgh was proud of its civic arena, except for all the thousands of people who were, hundreds at least, who were displaced from their homes and their businesses in the Hill District. So people were already kind of steamed. This had happened in the late 50s, early 60s. King was assassinated in the middle of a push for civil rights, and that was it. That was outrage. So people went into the streets, and initially, as I understood it, they targeted what they perceived as the businesses owned by white folks who had been exploiting them. Say a grocery store owned by somebody who lived in Squirrel Hill who was overcharging, or that was the perception. Those were initially the targets. Housing that was run by an exploitative landlord, that sort of thing. So people struck out at what they saw as the enemy. But like any other highly emotional social event, things intensified and intensified. So large amounts of real estate were burned or bulldozed or damaged or looted. The National Guard was called in. It was very tense. As far as I remember, there was nobody shot, but it was very tense, and it attracted national attention. The Pittsburgh community outside was very freaked out. This is the first time in living memory that there had been such intense activity, so much rancor expressed. It was like a kettle boiling over. And Lorraine, of course, insisted on going out and covering it. She took one of our student photographers with her, and she was out there talking to people and doing that. So she was the spunky girl reporter. But it was a very tense period. And to this day, you'll drive past businesses here around town that had replaced their glass windows with glass blocks, fearing that there would be further unrest and that they would be destroyed or demolished. So it was a tough time for everybody, but especially for the black community.
Thank you. 3 days after the assassination, which will put us on April 7th, the Pittsburgh Peace March happened, which you covered in the newspaper. Can you share your recollections about that?
Again, memory is not perfect, but this was starting to show up. here and there
Yeah.
for the first time. And I was starting to realize what that meant. You can shoot this later. I was starting to realize, wait a minute, there is this war going on. Again, I was a naive kid from the South Hills. There's this war, there is this increasing head of steam aimed at resisting and protesting the war. Again, more outrage. It was a time where there was a certain amount of outrage going on, a lot of outrage. And I don't remember that specific march, but I remember the feeling of the time, that people were hitting the streets, and that although, as I said earlier, the country wasn't as polarized as we see it today, there was a definite feeling that the country is unraveling and at the same time splitting into a right-wing conservative faction, what my mom used to call the hard hats, the blue-collar community, and the whatever, the hippies or the liberals, or however we thought of ourselves in those days, progressives. But it was all concentrated on issues like civil rights, the war. Those were the two big issues. So they have two major divisive emotional issues coming together at the same time in a way that we haven't seen since then until this past year or two.
Can you show us a little bit this pin again? Tell me a little bit more about this pin and what it represents.
Okay, well, as you may remember, or you may not, this was originally the symbol for nuclear disarmament, and it first popped up in Britain, I think, in the 50s. But by the 60s, it was adopted by the anti-war folks. It's a shorthand sign for no more war or peace, going along with this. Which, again, in those today, it's like, I'm taking a selfie. But in the old days, this was like a statement. And you could get punched out by flipping the peace sign to the wrong person. So this became a dominant piece of graffiti or something you wore on your jacket. And it had an emotional punch in those days that it's been diffused over the years, the way things do. And this is one of the original pins from the 60s.
So, 68, you said here? What year is
I don't know, it could have been made in 67 or something, but yeah, this was bought at a head shop, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Head shop?
Thank you for bringing us.
Oh, that's okay.
So we can see this.
But yeah, so you had a symbol, you had an attitude, you had a clearly defined cause that people were rallying behind, and then there was reaction and pushback from those who disagreed that the war should stop.
Okay, so your 1968 interview with Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey took place
You looked
during,
it up. Yeah.
Yes, took place during a time of significant social and political upheaval.
Right.
Can you share your memories of that interview for me, please?
Yeah, that was good. For background now, Hubert Humphrey was the vice president, and he was hoping to get the nomination for the presidential election. And part of his campaign effort was when he was visiting a city, he would get student unrest. Student unrest was something that hadn't really happened before, student unrest. So he would round up the editors of the student newspapers from that particular town, where there was more than one college or university, and do a little roundtable discussion. So we went out to Channel 4 in Forest Hills, which is still there. And I was wearing a three-piece suit. And we sat in a semicircle there, and Mr. Humphrey seemed like a perfectly nice fellow. I don't know. I hadn't followed his career up until then. He was perfectly civil and well-spoken and intelligent and courteous. And we were each given a chance to ask a question. And to be honest, I don't remember what my question was. You can probably, there is a transcript somewhere, I think. What did I ask? I have no idea what I asked, but I was being a serious student, serious person. Tried to be dignified and respectful. And it was a positive experience for me in terms of that. And I also had a chance to meet the editor of the Pitt News and probably the Chatham University, Chatham College editor, and maybe the Carnegie Mellon person, and what's the other school? Chatham,
Pittsburgh?
LaRoche, not LaRoche, but Point Park maybe. Anyway, so there's a community of college editors. That was probably the vividest impression I brought back from that. So I felt like I was included, but it didn't change my life.
Can you tell me how you were actually invited to this?
Good question. Good question. There was no email in those days.
Yes.
I would bet that the campaign got in touch with the journalism department, and Ed Gregory or B. Kendall Crane or somebody on the faculty stopped by and said, "George, you're invited to go." But I don't have a letter from that. But I would imagine it was channeled through the J department, and somebody came over and says, "Hey, you're on.
no
You're on
official
TV. You're gonna don't embarrass us, kid. You're on."
No official invitation of some sort?
If there was an official, an engraved invitation or something, it's long vanished. But I'm sure they would have gone through channels. They wouldn't have called it, some teenage kid directly from the campaign in those days.
All right, thank you. You cast an election extra issue Nixon. How did you decide to have an issue with Nixon?
Again, to be honest, I don't remember that decision. I remember being horrified when I woke up the morning that Nixon's victory was announced. I was shocked and dismayed.
Tell me a little bit about this feeling. You mentioned shocked
Well,
and dismayed.
by the time, again, from somebody who was just politically shapeless coming into the university, like I think a lot of kids, I started to realize there was such a thing as political awareness, and that there were at least two sides to the way the country was proceeding. And so by the time November rolled around, I was pretty convinced that Nixon was a big mistake. Many of us felt that he was shifty and way too committed to continuing the war. I think that was, again, the central issue. And that surely somebody as creepy as we thought of him, somebody as creepy as Nixon couldn't possibly be the president. So that particular issue, to be honest, I have to admit, I don't remember how that came about.
But you remember the feelings that evoked in you?
Oh, well, I was greatly disappointed. And at that point, I was starting to become, almost a lefty. So, yeah, I was feeling this is not a good idea. Things are not headed in a good direction.
Okay, thank you for that. The Duquesne University project with the Science Center, Union, and 1,200 student dorm represented significant expansion efforts.
Yes.
How did the university community react to these projects? Can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Well, I can recall a little bit. Is it Mellon Hall, the big black building, was a big deal. I think it was started going up in 1965. And it involved tearing down some of the sweet but non-functional old, essentially they were row houses that used to house various university departments up there. So there was a little old neighborhood that was up there. That was all bulldozed. I don't know if anybody really missed that. It wasn't like an urban renewal where populations were displaced, but the character of the university changed. There was this big modern building by a distinguished architect, Mies van der Rohe, who you know, of course, going up. So that brightened up that end of the campus, but of course imposed a certain geometric, maybe cold feeling to that corner. And then one of the rare tornadoes in Pittsburgh blew through there when all the ironwork was up, and it was flattened
Completely?
completely. And so there was a cause for maybe some humor, like, oh yeah, boom, you're done. But they were able to clean it up, put it back up, and it's been there ever since. But that changed that end of the campus substantially. The student union was dramatically new, and not everybody liked it. I liked it myself. I like simple, streamlined kinds of things, but not everybody liked it. It was not a university, old woodwork kind of paneled environment. It was hard-edged. It was brutalist in its style. And I think a lot of people sort of resented it. They had left comfy, funky old quarters, and now people who worked there had to live in hard-edged, glass-walled environments. But on the other hand, it was so convenient, and there was so much better, so much of a more hospitable place to hang out once you got inside. So I personally loved it. Occasionally doze off in the lounge, go down and get some coffee in the, did they call it the Ratskeller? I think they did, the lower section, lower level. So there was a place to grab a coffee, have a sandwich, a place to lounge around, and also a lot of the student activities were central to it. So unless you really felt obliged to go to class, you could spend your whole semester without ever leaving the building.
In that relationship, what were your favorite places to write on campus back then?
Well, I would say the student union, and specifically the Ratskeller. And before that, there was a Canavan cafeteria. Canavan Hall still here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a cafeteria in the lower level there before the student union opened up. So the Canavan Caf again, and it was a rowdy hangout for everybody. The Greeks all had their own tables there, and social clubs, I guess, like the Sheiks and the Rogues. Are they still here? I don't know. But anyway, social clubs had their own tables, and it was a place where you could meet people. You could play the jukebox. I wish I had all the money I blew on the jukebox back then. But so those areas were certainly my favorite environments around the campus. Academic Walk was nice, but it wasn't like a luxurious little park. It was a windy, blacktop kind of situation. And if you were dating somebody at the dorms, you could walk him or her down to the dorm, and so you'd be back and forth there. The edge of the bluff, which I guess is still there, where you can look over the railing, was I would say in good weather, that was a favorite hangout for me. I could park on a bench there and think or argue or canoodle as appropriate.
You mentioned Lorraine a couple of times.
Yeah.
Did you bring Lorraine to your favorite spots to write there?
Well, I think we wound up in the same spots,
same
just
spot?
spontaneously, sure, yeah.
Like attracting magnets to each other?
It gradually developed, yeah, nature took its course. Yeah, she was, actually, her housing was down at Point Park because there was a shortage of student housing at Duquesne. So every day she would hike from Point Park, which is over on the other side of the Boulevard of the Allies, through town, up the hill to Duquesne to go to class or to hang out at the Duke or do whatever she had to do.
Thank you for that. How did the Duke help you in your career?
Well, that's a complicated question. I feel that it did, yes. Certainly it gave me my first taste of actually producing something that would be published. And when I had essentially a blank resume coming out of school, I could at least say, well, I was the editor of my paper. So that was at least a place for a conversation to start. At the same time, while I was in school, I had interned at the Pittsburgh Press, which was one of the two daily newspapers in those days, for 2 summers. So I had that, and those two, the Duke and the internships kind of fed each other, reinforced each other. So, but after a couple of years, it was no longer necessary to mention that I was the editor of the Duke. You wouldn't put that on your resume later in later life. But the skills came with me, and I built on them. So in retrospect, it was a positive experience and constructive and profitable for me, yeah.
Today you brought your typewriter. Tell me your favorite memory or story or issue that you type on it, because it's really impressive.
Well, it was that, and we could talk about technology if you care to, but it's such a striking contrast with the way things are done today. I had this 30-pound manual typewriter it was never built to be carried around. It was meant to be put on a desk and be there for 50 years. And I would sit at my desk and hammer out, let's say, an editorial. Friday afternoon, all the copy was due because we had to get it to the typesetter. Deadline, there was your deadline. That's what a deadline means. Friday afternoon. Okay. So I'd be hammering out frantically an editorial about something, and the driver from the printer or the typesetter would be at the door waiting to pick up the copy. And I would sometimes have to ask the guys to take Frank, the driver, downstairs and buy him a cup of coffee, so I'd have another 20 minutes to finish up my editorial. So that's what I remember most about the typewriter. I had fingers of steel by the end of the year, which you don't have today, just from that hammering on that machine.
That was very interesting. So you didn't actually, do you actually think that the typewriter back time comparison to the technology today, how do you feel about that?
Well, I don't think the end product is any better or any worse. There are still a few writers today who insist on having a typewriter. I think Stephen King may be one. You can Google writers who still use typewriters out there. Tom Hanks has a huge collection of manual typewriters. But there was the beginning of a transition from manual typewriters to electric typewriters, which had a much lighter touch, but it was the same format. You had a large, heavy machine with an electric motor inside of it, and you could tap, 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 tap very gently. Did your brain function differently? Not a heck of a lot, I don't think. You could go from, well, I used to write longhand, then I had to do typewriting, and like in the space of an afternoon, I think my brain adapted to that. Okay, pip, 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 pip. Now, what you couldn't do with the manual typewriter was erase things. You couldn't, it wasn't convenient to like rethink something and retype it, rethink it and type it. You had to rip the paper out, crumple it up, throw it in a basket, and then start over after you made a certain number of mistakes or revisions. So it slowed down the process a little bit. But I'm not sure that the end product was much different. You learn to think through your fingertips, typing on that or on your computer. So the computer streamlines it a little bit, but it also invites you to putz around with it more. And there's that thing, you know yourself, where because I can revise, I'm gonna revise. And that can lead to just dragging things out. You have a deadline to hit no matter what, so whatever you're using, you sort of learn to back time it. I'm going to have to start tonight instead of tomorrow morning to get something done, and it becomes unconscious. But as far as technology, you'd take the paper out of the machine and hand it to somebody else who was the designated copy editor, who with a big fat pencil would mark it up. Crappy paper. It was like newsprint paper cut down to that. somebody else would mark it up, write a headline, correct the punctuation and the spelling, cross out the last 3 paragraphs, and it went in the envelope with all the other stories that went to the typesetter off-site, off-campus. The typesetter would key it in through a typesetting machine and give you back strips, columns of text that you would then, they would come back to the paper, you would cut them up and paste them onto a blank page, and then that would go back to the printer, who would photograph the page and use that to make the printing plates, the offset plates, that would be then used to crank out the paper. So the technology was all analog, many more steps. It was simpler in other ways, but again, it feels as though we've gained a little bit, but we've lost a little bit, so it balances out.
Thank you for that. Is there something that you want to share that I didn't cover today?
Oh, a million things.
Okay.
Only kidding.
Only.
All right, you didn't ask me about my butt.
Yes, I'm asking you about now. Tell me about it a little bit.
Okay, back in the Duke office, posted against the back wall, there was an old hand-lettered sign that must have come from the previous Duke office, and no one ever explained to me why it was there or who created it. But it said "Edit Tight."
Yes.
And in my formative year there, I sort of adopted that as what you might say, a personal slogan or a mantra or something. And to me, it meant, it meant edit your stuff tightly, short, compressed, terse, in that journalistic way. Don't forget, keep it simple, but also edit the publication tightly. No slop, no fat, no excess wordage. Exercise good judgment in what's worth printing and what's not. And it stuck with me for a long time. That was what that meant. So to me, it was like the slogan. It was like the "Just Do It"
Just do it.
of the Duke, or the all the news that's fit to print, or the "Democracy Dies in Darkness" of the Duke. And to me, it was just personal. I mean, if I had thought about it, I might have put it up on the front page. But it was my personal mantra, and I'm not sure how many of the other staffers really paid any attention to it.
You mentioned it's like a personal mantra. Have you always wear this on your jacket?
No. I actually, when I first heard of this project, it came back to me,
Oh, you did something.
and I had some buttons made because I just wanted to do a shout out to whoever. Here, this is yours.
Oh, thank you so much.
A shout out to whoever the unknown person was in 1947 who stuck that sign up on the wall.
Anything else that you want to share that I didn't cover?
Well, I don't know. You'll have to tell me when we're running out of time. I was going to point out that the Duke and the New Yorker both were formed in the same year.
Okay.
So
you
you're-
can tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, the New Yorker, of course, you know.
Yeah.
But it just struck me as being funny. I hadn't realized that the Duke went back to 1925, but you had these two major forces in the media starting at the same time. 1925, the New Yorker was just kicking off. So that's, I don't know, something that's a psychic bond of some sort. And of course, some of the best writing on the planet has come out of the New Yorker, so somebody might draw inspiration from that. Let's
I
see.
see you have a notes there, so
No, well, tell me when we're done, really. Hubert Humphrey, you asked me about him, technology. I guess maybe, again, part of the consciousness-raising thing for me, which I took away from the Duke, was exposure to the broader culture, what was happening in what we now think of as the media. there was the paper, the Duke had subscriptions to things like the Village Voice, which was
What was that?
the main.
The Village
How
Voice.
quickly they forget. The Village Voice was from Greenwich Village. It was the big underground newspaper of the 1960s, when underground papers started to be a thing. And so it was an alternative press, and a very first day, a respected organ of news and opinion coming out of New York. And I was, by then, of course, I was reading the New York Times. In a way, the New York Times was my journalism school to a great extent. I learned, oh, this is how you write something. This is what a newspaper looks like. These are how ideas are expressed. This is what journalism looks like. But at the same time, I could look at something like the Village Voice or the Berkeley Barb, which was another one.
What was that? The Berkeley?
Berkeley Barb, B-A-R-B.
Thank you.
And I would see, wait a minute, the way things look from Pittsburgh isn't the way the country is viewing events these days. There is civil unrest, there is civil rights, there is the anti-war movement. And I felt much more cosmopolitan being exposed to those student or counterculture media that I wouldn't have run into before I hooked up with the Duke. I might not even have noticed. I'm sure that people having coffee in the student union, most of them were not aware of what you might say counterculture media in those days, independent media. They were sort of the, what would I say, the blogs and the podcasts of their day, but they were still on paper. The other thing that I
Yes,
loved,
I'm listening.
the other thing I loved was that the record companies every month would send a huge box of vinyl. So there would be LPs from people like Bob Dylan and the Grateful Dead and Janis Joplin that again helped me personally, and I'm sure some of the people in the staff, to realize the arts out there were not what we were getting from the local radio stations. So there might be a little fight when the records came in, and theoretically we were supposed to that was the idea. These are review copies. And I wish I still had, maybe I do. My first Grateful Dead record was a review copy. Somebody might well have written a review of it. Here in audio at Duquesne, people were listening to Joni Mitchell. So that was a cultural thing for me again.
Are those free? You mentioned free in the box?
Oh, yeah, sure. Just like a book, you're asking if they were free.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, they were hoping, it didn't matter to them. Cost nothing to press an extra vinyl record, but they would send them out to campus papers, hoping, or maybe even, I'm sure campus radio station, we had WDUQ in those days. They would send them out hoping that people would review them and put a blurb in the paper about Janis Joplin, here's a new voice, hoping that people would read the review and buy the record, just as they sent them to the New York Times.
Is there anything else that you wish to say?
I could talk all day, but I'm running out of steam. I think you've got...
You're running out of steam.
I'm happy. I'm feeling like I've been properly respected here, and I've expressed anything I could possibly productively express.
So let's the final question be on a positive note. If there's something that you could recommend to the young editor-in-chiefs that you can, what that thing would be?
Well, again, I'm sure the folks who are doing this today are smarter and hipper and more savvy than I am, but basic stuff that you can't forget is edit tight, keep it short, keep it disciplined. Don't be an authoritarian, but keep things streamlined and no more fancy and elaborate than they need to be. As far as how do you get out the paper, how do you manage it, never be sure you have all the right answers, and if you're feeling a little uncertain, know that maybe that's a time to ask somebody, and that somebody could be a faculty person. in retrospect, I think I could have gathered some expertise and some knowledge and some reinforcement maybe by going to one of the more approachable faculty people and saying, I'm not quite sure how to do this, or what are the expectations for this, this facet of the job, or for the job itself. As I think back, when I took over the controls, I never had even a conversation with the previous editor. If I had been smart, I would have said, wait, I want to talk to who had this job before and how did they get it done? And conversely, if the journalism department or somebody had been thinking about it, they would have said, well, you know, George, you should talk to Betty Sue or whoever it was, because she could confer on you some of the wisdom that she had accumulated. So being willing, and I may be unusual in my reticence about asking for help. I hate asking for help. But ask for help. Don't hesitate. You're not going to be shamed. Very rarely does somebody put you down when you come to them and say, what's expected of this job? Or can you suggest something that worked for you in the past? Most people would say, well, yeah, I remember when blah, blah, blah. Here's what you could do. Or let me help you figure this out. So look for a mentor. You don't have to subjugate yourself to somebody. But leave yourself open to the fact that mentorships can be out there, or that people who have been through the experience even just a year ahead of you probably won't smack you if you say, hey, how did we do that? So open yourself up.
So your final advice will be look for a mentor to guide you?
Be open to a mentor, yeah,
Be open to a
yeah,
mentor.
yeah.
Okay.
Be more open than you might think you could be.
And ask for help.
I'm sorry?
And ask for help.
Yes, ask
Yeah.
for help, for sure, yeah.
Well, thank you, George, for this interview. I was really honored to interview you today, so thank you so much.
Oh, shucks, I was honored to be part of the project.
Okay, thank you. Cut. Done.
Okay, are we done? Okay,
Yes.
I'm sorry we got to do this all over. This was a mess.
No.